Read this list slowly, and notice it's not actually about a wedding. Patient. Kind. Doesn't envy. Doesn't boast. Isn't easily angered. Keeps no record of wrongs. Now stop treating it as a poem for a second, and read it again as a checklist, about you, specifically, this week, in your actual relationships. That's uncomfortable, and it's supposed to be. 1 Corinthians 13 isn't just the most quoted chapter on love in the Bible. It's also one of the most precisely worded. Paul builds it out of 15 separate verbs, 7 describing what love does and 8 describing what it refuses to do, and none of them are vague. This week's study asks a harder question than, what is love? It asks, if you ran your own life against this exact list, item by item, how many would actually hold up? Not the version of you that shows up at your best, in front of people who are watching. The version that shows up on the 4th interruption of the day, or the version that finds out someone talked about you behind your back. And more importantly, whose life does hold up against every single one, without a single exception. Paul doesn't open this chapter gently. He opens it by taking away everything else first. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Read what he's actually willing to throw out. Eloquence. Prophetic insight. Encyclopedic knowledge. Mountain-moving faith. Total generosity, even to the point of personal suffering. Every one of those is something the church at Corinth was actively bragging about. They turned tongues into a status symbol, prophecy into a ranking system, and generosity into a performance. And Paul says all of it, without love, adds up to noise, nothing, and zero gain. Not less impressive. Nothing. He's not saying these gifts are worthless. He's saying they're worthless specifically when they're detached from love, which is a much sharper and more personal accusation than, spiritual gifts don't matter. There's a word doing enormous work throughout this chapter, and it's worth naming directly, agapao, the Greek word behind love here. It shows up over 135 times across Paul's letters, almost half of every time that word family appears anywhere in the entire New Testament. This wasn't a passing theme for him. It was closer to an obsession, and Jesus himself warned exactly what happens when it's neglected. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Not gifts growing cold. Not doctrine growing cold. Love. This is also worth noticing structurally. This chapter sits wedged directly between 2 chapters about spiritual gifts, chapter 12, which we covered last week, and chapter 14, about tongues and prophecy. Paul isn't taking a break from the subject of gifts to write a poem. He interrupts a technical discussion about tongues, prophecy, and spiritual authority to insert this chapter right in the middle of it, which is a strange place to put something if it were only meant as a wedding reading. He's telling the Corinthians the one thing their whole gifted, talented, impressive church was missing, at the exact moment they were most likely to skip past it. Monday's study breaks down what love actually does, verb by verb, and each one repays slowing down on. Love is patient, macrothymio, which means showing patience even in genuinely difficult circumstances, not just when patience is easy or convenient. This is the patience that survives being tested repeatedly by the same person, not just the one-time kind. Love is kind, krestuomai, a rare word that means letting your treatment of others actually mirror God's own compassion and mercy toward you, not just being pleasant when it costs nothing. Love rejoices with the truth, sigkero, the specific ability to feel real joy alongside someone else, including someone else's win that isn't your own, the promotion that should have been yours, the answered prayer you've been praying for too. Love bears all things, stego, which carries a sense of resilience, the capacity to absorb weight without breaking or publicly airing it. Love believes all things, pisteuo, which here means giving people the actual benefit of the doubt, not naive gullibility that ignores real evidence, but a default posture of trust rather than suspicion. Love hopes all things, el piso, the real expectation that something good is still possible for someone, even when the evidence in front of you is thin or discouraging. And love endures all things, hypomeno, staying under the weight of hardship rather than stepping out from under it at the first opportunity to walk away. Put those 7 side by side with Galatians 5 verse 22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. Notice how much overlap there is, patience, kindness, faithfulness under pressure. That's not a coincidence. Paul is describing the same Spirit-shaped character in 2 different letters, from 2 different angles, and both times it reads as active verbs, not passive feelings. Here's what's easy to miss about all 7 of these: not one of them is circumstantial. Nothing on this list depends on the other person deserving it first. Tuesday flips to the negative list, and it's actually longer, 8 refusals instead of 7 actions, which is itself worth noticing before we even get to what they mean. Love does not envy, zelu, because envy is specifically corrosive to community. It causes division from the inside, quietly resenting the very people it should be celebrating. Love does not boast, purpuromai, a word that captures arrogance and a hunger for other people's praise, the compulsive need to make sure everyone knows what you did. Love is not puffed up, physio, describing someone inflated with their own self-importance, taking up more room in a conversation, or a relationship than they actually deserve. Love does not behave rudely, ascomonio, acting in a way that's dishonorable or improper by the basic standards people expect of each other, the kind of behavior that would embarrass you if it were caught on camera. Love does not seek its own, zedio, meaning love is willing to give up its own rights for someone else's sake, even rights it would technically be justified in keeping. Love is not easily angered, paroxeno, not short-tempered, not touchy, not looking for a reason to react, the opposite of someone who seems to be waiting for an excuse. Love keeps no record of wrongs, logizomai, a word borrowed straight from bookkeeping. Love refuses to keep a ledger of what it's owed, the kind of ledger some relationships run on for years without either person naming it out loud. And love does not delight in evil, chero used in the negative. Love takes no private satisfaction when someone else fails, even someone who's genuinely wronged you before. Here's a fair question worth sitting with: why does Paul spend this much space on what love refuses to do, instead of just staying positive? Because the corruption of love rarely shows up as hatred. It shows up as scorekeeping, as quiet resentment, as being secretly pleased when someone who wronged you stumbles. Those are the failure modes that hide inside people who'd never call themselves unloving. Look at that list again and notice something else. Almost every item on it is describing exactly what was happening in the Corinthian church itself: the boasting about gifts, the rivalry, the self-importance, the keeping score of who'd wronged whom. Paul isn't writing in the abstract here. He's holding up a mirror to the specific room he's writing to. Here's the turn that reframes everything that came before it. Paul almost certainly had one specific person in mind while writing this entire chapter, and it wasn't a hypothetical ideal. It was Jesus. Which means this isn't just a description of love in general, it's a portrait of Christ, painted one verb at a time. Patient. Paul writes elsewhere that Christ Jesus displayed his immense patience specifically toward Paul himself, a man who'd spent years hunting down and persecuting the church before his conversion, dragging believers out of their homes. If patience runs out anywhere, it should have run out there, and it didn't. Kind. Peter simply states it as fact, no argument attached: you have tasted that the Lord is good. Bears and endures all things. The book of Hebrews describes Jesus enduring the cross itself, the most literal possible fulfillment of that word, not enduring an inconvenience, enduring actual execution, and doing it for the joy set before him, which is its own answer to what it means to rejoice in truth even in the middle of real suffering. Believes all things. When Ananias hesitated to go anywhere near Saul of Tarsus, the man who'd been arresting Christians by name, the Lord answered plainly, "This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel." Jesus extended trust toward the exact person with the least track record to deserve it, based on nothing visible yet, and events prove that trust right for the rest of church history. Doesn't seek its own. Paul elsewhere writes that Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, Philippians 2 verses 6-7. If there's a more complete example of not insisting on your own rights, it's hard to find one. Run through the rest of the list yourself and the pattern holds every time. Every verb Paul uses to define love, Jesus embodies without a single exception, not most of the list, not the easy parts. All of it, under every kind of pressure the list describes. Which means this chapter was never really asking, can you love perfectly? It was showing you what perfect love already looks like, in an actual person, so you'd recognize it when you saw a fragment of it, and so you'd have somewhere real to actually aim, not just an abstract ideal. Paul closes the chapter by naming what actually lasts. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease, where there are tongues, they will be stilled, where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Every impressive spiritual gift the Corinthians were competing over has a built-in expiration date. Love doesn't. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Paul's honest that even his own understanding is partial, a blurred reflection, not a clear view. But something is coming that resolves that. When Christ actually returns, faith gives way to sight. You don't need faith in what you can already see with your own eyes. Hope gets fulfilled, you don't keep hoping for what's already arrived. But love doesn't have an expiration date built into its nature the way faith and hope do, because love isn't primarily a response to uncertainty. It's the character of God himself. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Not, God is loving, as one trait among others. God is love, full stop, the only virtue in Scripture ever used to define God's actual nature, not just describe his behavior. And now these three remain, faith, hope and love. But the greatest of these is love. Paul isn't ranking three good things and picking a favorite the way you'd rank a list of virtues in the abstract. He's telling you which one of the three you'll still be living inside of after the other two have finished their job. Faith and hope are essential precisely because things aren't yet the way they're supposed to be, they're built for an in-between season. Love isn't a response to an in-between season at all. It's the actual destination, which is why it's also the one thing worth building your whole life around starting now, rather than treating it as something you'll get to once the more urgent things are handled. So here's the harder question this week actually leaves you with: which single item on Paul's list, positive or negative, do you personally need to work on most right now, not in general, but this week, with a specific person? It's worth being honest that a life can look impressively spiritual and still fail this test completely. You can have real faith, genuine knowledge, even a track record of sacrifice, and still be running a private ledger of who owes you an apology. Love isn't a feeling you either have or don't. It's a series of choices, repeated toward people who haven't earned them yet, patience chosen again on the fourth interruption, kindness chosen again after being taken for granted, a record intentionally left unkept even though you could recite it from memory without even trying. Notice, too, that Paul never tells the Corinthians to feel differently about each other. He tells them what love does and doesn't do, actions, not emotional states. That's actually good news for anyone who's ever felt like they've run out of warm feelings toward a specific person. You don't need the feeling to start. You need the next verb, patient, one more time, today, with the specific person currently making that hard. That's also why Paul places this chapter exactly where he does, sandwiched between two chapters about spiritual gifts. The gifts were never the point. They were tools, and tools without love just make noise faster and reach further. A church, or a person, can be extraordinarily gifted and still be described accurately by verse 1, a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal. Go back to that list from the opening, patient, kind, keeps no record of wrongs, and read it one more time. It was never a wedding verse. It's a portrait, and the only person who's ever matched it completely is the one this whole letter is actually pointing toward. Not because the wedding readings were wrong to use it, love really is patient, really is kind, in a marriage as much as anywhere else. But the chapter was never written to describe the easiest kind of love, the kind you feel towards someone on the best day of your life. It was written to describe the kind that keeps choosing patience on an ordinary Tuesday, towards someone who hasn't earned it, because that's the love that was actually revealed in full, once, in a real life, and it's the only version of the list worth actually aiming at. If this study opens something up for you, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that love, in the end, is the one thing that was never going to expire.